I'm in college in a pretty rural part of the country. I won't get more specific than that. The important part is about halfway through this past semester, I was running pretty low on cash. I searched out a job on campus for a while, but I just couldn't bring myself to work retail or be at a desk answering phones all day. I only decided to drive for Uber because I could make my own hours, and basically work as little or as much as I wanted. Plus, most of the time, my passengers were students, so it allowed me to meet people on campus I might not have met otherwise. For a while, it was actually a really good gig. There were some late night puke rides, and even a couple drunkenly handsy guys in my front seat. But overall, I felt like I was making good money and not really working too hard. Until last week. I didn't have any plans for last weekend, so I decided I would go out and be a good Samaritan, driving drunk college kids home safely. I knew I'd make good money because there would be a surplus of people who needed a reliable ride, so I didn't really have anything to lose. I would wait in the McDonald's parking lot and read my book or play on my phone while waiting for someone's ride request to come up on the screen. I'd pick them up, bring them home, drive back to the parking lot, repeat. I started driving around 11 p.m. and planned on finishing up around 3 a.m. Since most rides were just going between buildings on campus, I knew I'd be able to get a lot of drives within the last 4-hour period. Everything went pretty smoothly, a couple of close calls with vomit and my leather interior, but no true disasters. I was getting tipped pretty well, despite the inebriation of the passengers I was picking up, and everyone, for the most part, was really friendly. At about 1, I got a notification that someone had requested a ride. The pickup spot was really close, one of the old apartment buildings about 10 blocks away from the lot I'd been idling in. Looking closer, I noticed where the ride was heading. It was some random address a few towns over, much farther than I'd gone with any of my other drives at night. In the moment, this actually made it more appealing to accept, since obviously, the longer the ride, the more I get paid. It didn't seem like a sketchy area or anything like that, so I accepted the request and turned over the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I realized I'd been sitting there reading my book for almost half an hour. I guess it had been a slow point in my night, and I turned around to see if there was a lot of other cars around. Weirdly, everything was off. The street lights, the window lights of nearby businesses, even the McDonald's inside lights were off. Although, I swore the one I was parked at was 24 hours. I just brushed it off, figuring everything was just finally closing up for the night, and that I was usually out late enough to see the streetlights be turned off. It took me 4 or 5 minutes to get to the address where I was supposed to pick this guy up. He didn't have a profile picture, but his name was Mark. It also seemed like he didn't have any rider ratings, meaning his account was either brand new or he just never used it. I made a right turn onto the street where the address was located, and as I looked around, I started to think maybe someone pranked me. The street was completely residential, which wasn't out of the ordinary for the area, but all the houses were completely dilapidated. Graffiti, broken windows, boarded up front doors. I couldn't imagine anyone possibly living in there, let alone having a party there. My house hunting was interrupted by the sound of my phone telling me I was approaching the destination on my right. I looked down at the street, and I could just barely make out the shape of who I assumed was the person I was picking up, standing on the front lawn. As my car inched closer, I could see that he was really just standing there. It didn't look like he had a phone in his hand or anything. Even stranger, he was waving. Not waving at me, My car wasn't even close enough for him to do that. He was out on the lawn, facing across the street, just waving at nothing. I really thought once I approached the final destination, I would see some newer, fancier house built on the street that I'd just never seen before. I was very wrong. The house that I approached, which was behind the lawn my passenger was standing on, looked almost more broken down than the rest. The roof had completely caved in, and you could see the old rooms through broken parts of the wall. None of the windows had any glass, and the front door had been completely ripped off its hinges. Wind ripped through the frame, shaking the entire house. It was definitely not somewhere livable. I stopped the car right in front of the lawn, which is when I finally got a chance to focus on the man's frame for a brief moment. He was tall, lanky even, and had clothes on that didn't seem like they fit or matched. His pants cut off around his mid-calf and hugged his legs extremely tight, while his t-shirt moved with the wind around him, hardly even touching his body. He had no coat on despite it being winter, but wore a fedora. His shoes were absolutely huge, looking almost disproportionate to his body. His face looked relatively normal, like a thin man in his early 30s. His cheekbones were very pronounced, and his eyes sunk hollowly backward into his skull. He was still waving, but now his eyes shifted focus to me. "Hi, here for Mark?" I rolled down my window about halfway. "Yeah." The man started, ceasing his waving. His hand hung motionless in the air for a moment before returning to his side. He didn't break eye contact with me until he took a step to open the car door. Normally, when people are taking an Uber alone, they just sit up in the front seat. But Mark moved to the back door and sat on the rear right seat, diagonal to me. For some reason, this sent a shiver up my spine, knowing that he could basically just watch me drive without me noticing. After directing my phone to start navigation, I decided to start a conversation. "So, what brings you out tonight?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror. Our eyes met. I met some friends," he muttered. His voice was sharp and gravelly, and by his tone, I could tell he didn't want to talk. Usually when I drive for Uber, I don't turn on my radio, since I know many people have strong feelings about music. I let him have his space and drove in silence for a few minutes, almost forgetting he was there, until his voice piped up from the back seat. "Hey, do you mind if I eat?" I thought about it for a moment. Normally, I would say no, but for some reason, I just felt like I really didn't want to make this guy mad. He was bigger than me after all, definitely big enough to overpower me. As a relatively small woman, I knew I needed to be cautious about who I was angering. "No, that's fine." I saw him nod in the rear view before pulling up a bag from his feet that I hadn't noticed him having before, and I focused my eyes back on the road as he unwrapped his food. Another minute or so of silence passed, again leaving my mind nearly vacant of his presence. It honestly hadn't even sounded like he was eating anything, until the sound of his initial bite brought me out of my mental autopilot. Crunch. The sound was wet and loud. I didn't even need to look into the mirror to know that something strange was happening, but I was too freaked out to not sneak a glance, and I wish I hadn't. When I looked into the rear view, I just saw teeth. Not long, sharp teeth, but normal human ones. Rows of them. His entire jaw had unhinged and expanded to the point where I could see all the way down his throat when he opened his mouth. And I would guess probably 8 or more rows of teeth spread back into his head. Blood dripped from the sides of his mouth down his chin, and he hardly even swallowed his precious mouthful before biting into the next piece. I quickly shifted my gaze back to the road before he could make eye contact with him. I'd forgotten to breathe until that moment, and it took everything in me not to swerve to the side of the road and take off running. I had no idea what to do, so I just kept following the directions. My phone said I only had another 3 or 4 minutes to go until I reached his destination. But now, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to go there. Crunch. I just kept driving. Every time he took a bite, I could hear the sound of blood splattering against a nearby surface. I knew that no matter where I was taking him, I just wanted him out of my car as fast as possible. Crunch. All of the streetlights were still out, and I hadn't seen a single car since I left the pickup spot. I was praying for someone to just drive by, see me panicked, see what was happening in my car, and stop. As I looked out onto further nearby streets, everything looked desolate. There was no one to see this. Half mile to the destination. Crunch. My heart was throbbing harder than I've ever heard it before. I wouldn't let myself look back again. Out of fear, he would see me. I knew what was happening back there wasn't something I was supposed to see, and I had to just pretend I couldn't. I made 2 more turns until finally I made a right onto the street where the destination was. To my horror, it was the exact same street I had picked him up on. Same empty houses, same graffiti, same uneasiness. I didn't know how it could be possible. I followed the directions perfectly. It was the only thing that allowed me to redirect my focus from my passenger. Sure enough, my navigation ended in front of the same dilapidated house I had been summoned to. As I screeched my brakes to a stop, I could hear him gnawing on the last bit of something tough. "Here you are," I said, sensing that he was finally still. I let myself glance back in the rear view again. Our eyes immediately met. His lips curled to a smile, exposing his inhuman teeth. He was covered in blood. It was dripping down his neck and onto his baggy shirt, making almost the entire thing wet and stained. His pupils had rolled back, exposing only the whites of his eyes, but somehow I knew he was looking at me. His head seemed huge. "Thank you so much. Have a great night." Without breaking the stare, he reached over and pulled open the door handle, shuffling his thin body until he could throw his feet out onto the pavement. Holding the frame of the door, he lifted himself up and out. When the door finally shut, I couldn't help but watch him move back towards his original spot, where he was standing when I picked him up. He had such a rickety nature about his movement, almost like he'd never truly learned how to walk. As if by instinct, he stopped in the exact same spot that I've seen him, and faced out towards the street. As I accelerated down the road, his bloody gaze followed me through the window. Even after I was far enough to only see him in the rearview mirror, I could tell his stare hadn't broken. He was waving. The next morning, I got up to discover that my car had no evidence of him ever being there. No blood, no food, nothing. My Uber app hadn't even acknowledged that I'd made the drive, which was maybe the worst part. I had no proof that any of this happened. I seriously considered that maybe this was all a dream after all, a product of my long night of driving. But it was too real. I've had bad drives before, although nothing like this, and normally I would just allow myself to forget about it and move on. But it occurred to me, if he really had ordered a drive with me through Uber, it means he has my phone number. Danielle's pickup point was at the northeast corner of 37th and 2nd. Anything that close to the Midtown Tunnel during morning rush hour was a pain, but luck seemed to be on my side when a fellow black Camry braved the angry honks of surrounding traffic to let me into the left lane. I used to think an easy pickup was a good sign. It was just barely 8:30 in the morning, but already the temperature had climbed to the low 90s, and the poor guy was wearing a suit, jacket, and all. I cranked the AC as he got into the back seat. Going downtown? Daniel's route popped up in the app as I started the ride. Yeah, he answered. Church and Vesey. Just as I was about to take the 36th Street entrance to FDR, the app dinged with another pickup. Evan, all the way on 23rd and Park Avenue Street. Skipping the highway and going cross town bumped back Daniel's drop-off time by 20 minutes. I heard him sigh behind me. Evan was small, blonde, and female. Maybe it was her boyfriend's account, or her parents had really wanted a boy. She shivered, obviously, and I took the hint, turning the AC down a bit. Evan was going to Brooklyn. I'd be dropping off Daniel first. I checked a quick glance at him in the rearview mirror. His chin was against his chest, and I assumed he had fallen asleep. We were being routed down Broadway now. At this hour, it would be traffic the whole way. He had some time to get in a quick nap. Daniel slept, while Evan screwed around with her phone. The app directed me to his drop-off point, and we reached the corner of Broadway and Vesey at 9:20. Looks like he'd have to walk. This good? I asked when he didn't move to get out. Actually, it looked like he was still asleep. Hey man, I said a little louder. Time to get out. You're here. This got Evan's attention, but not Danielle's. She rolled her eyes at me in the mirror. Come on. She shook him lightly. The look on her face grew concerned when he still didn't move, except to slump against the door. You think he's okay? I turned the hazards on and got out. I'm not sure what I expected to happen when I opened the back door, but when Danielle tumbled out onto the concrete, his face impassive and peaceful, I was somehow both surprised and not surprised at the same time. He wasn't breathing. Apparently, he hadn't been for a while. I didn't stick around to find out what had happened. Just long enough for me and Evan to give the cops and paramedics a statement and our contact information in case there was anything else it needed. I ended Evan's ride to Brooklyn long ago and offered to take her wherever she wanted, which ended up being back to Flatiron. She was shaken. I was too, but I'm pretty sure I would have remembered to tip. I wish I could say that Danielle was the only passenger who died in my car. Truth is, he was only the first. It was just a short 15-minute drive home. I was being responsible after having one too many cocktails on my third date from Tinder. I didn't feel quite comfortable enough with him driving me home, because, You hear all those horror stories. Everyone uses Uber. It was a safe service. That is what I thought anyways. In fact, this wasn't my first time using the app. I have had to snag a ride through the service a few times before. I knew the drill. I wasn't scared. I just wanted to get home. I'm not trying to scare you by telling you my story. I'm trying to warn you. My app dinged with the name Joe. I love that they let you know the name of the person picking you up. It makes you feel more comfortable with the person. I open the front door, passenger seat, to hop in, like I normally do when it's just me. The driver, Joe, acted nervous and told me to sit in the back seat, which I thought was strange, but I just shrugged it off. I jumped in the back, buckled up, and we set off to my destination. 6 water bottles were placed in a cooler pack in the middle seat, along with a tray of snacks consisting of granola bars, Jolly Ranchers, and goldfish. I loved it when the drivers did this. I was gonna give him 5 stars, especially after a night of drinking. Those water bottles were a godsend. I dug through a pile of snacks and plopped a blue Jolly Rancher in my mouth. "Hey Joe, do you have any good tunes?" He didn't respond. Surely, he heard me. Or maybe I was drunk and slurring. I piped up again, this time louder after clearing my throat. "Joe, excuse me." He looked at me through the rearview mirror. "Oh, yeah." He proceeded to turn on the radio. A country song that's overplayed squeaked through the speakers, but Joe was acting fidgety, so I figured I would just ride this out. It wouldn't be too much longer till I was home. A few minutes of awkward silence. Joe finally began to speak up. "You been drinking tonight?" I twiddled my thumbs and looked out the side window. I was so tired and I just wanted to curl up in my bed. Replied with a solemn, "Just a few drinks." He shifted in his seat, kept creeping his eyes up to the rearview mirror. One hand was on the steering wheel as he kept us steady on the road. I could tell that he was trying to catch glimpses of me without me noticing. He spoke up again. This time, a grin spread across his face. "What all did you drink tonight?" Bored with the dragging of the ride, I figured this was innocent small talk. A little different from what all other drivers would talk about. Yes, but still innocent. I had tequila sunrise, an old-fashioned, and a few glasses of champagne. He sat up in his seat, one arm still on the wheel. Those deep brown eyes kept flickering at me in the rearview mirror. Almost every couple of seconds, he started to pry. "You drink tequila often?" Casually replied while I kept my eyes out the window. "Sometimes, just depends on my mood." He chuckled. "You drunk tonight?" This is what made me feel uncomfortable. Obviously, I didn't want to drive home myself, so one could assume that I was at best tipsy. Why was he questioning my level of coherence? I kept my eyes focused out the window because I was getting creeped out by the accidental eye contact we were making through the rearview mirror. "Oh no, just a little buzzed." He kept a tight-lipped smile, then spoke. "You want to be drunk, though." "I have a bottle of tequila back there." I stared down at my phone. Just 5 more minutes till I was home. No thanks. I'm actually good." He had both hands on the steering wheel now. He was gripping it tight and rubbing his hands against the leather. This nervous feeling rose in my gut. And I know that they say to never ignore your gut feelings. But I was already in the car with this guy. I was a few minutes from my house. What was I supposed to do? I sat there and kept my eyes glued to the window. Perhaps if I didn't show any interest in conversing with him, He would just get me home without suggesting anything inappropriate. Whatever I was doing seemed to be working, because he changed his tune throughout his next response. "So, you done partying for the night, huh? Responsible." I let out a short chuckle and agreed with him. I was being responsible. He piped up again, this time more friendly than before and less interrogating. "Well, help yourself to a water. I have plenty." My heart started to slow, and I realized that he was just trying to earn that 5-star review by being accommodating. Maybe he is just trying to be nice. There's all these snacks and drinks in his car, and free alcohol. Maybe he was just trying to get his Uber score up. Maybe he has a family at home who he's trying to provide for. Was I being too judgmental? I silently scolded myself at the intrusive thoughts. I grabbed the water bottle, twisted the lid off, and took a couple gulps. I saw the turn from my street ahead, and a rush of relief washed over me. That is, until he passed it. That's right, he completely passed my street. I sat up in my seat, screwed the lid back on the water bottle, and spoke up. "Oh, that was my street you just passed." Nothing. Silence. Again, I spoke up, louder this time since my driver seemed to have a hearing problem. "You passed my street." One deadpan answer from him made my heart jump into my throat. "I know." I put my foot down this time. "I need you to turn around. My house is back." Before I could finish my sentence, he interrupted me. "Shut up." I sank back in my seat as panic set in. I still had my phone in hand. I could call for help still. This calmed me down until he slammed the brakes on. Spit hit the dash as he screamed, "Dang it!" The good thing is that I had my seatbelt on, or surely I would have slammed into the glass. The sudden break flung my phone from my hands. I could still see the light of it though. It had slid underneath his seat. He did a donut on the street and started to speed in the opposite direction we were just driving in. My voice was shaking, and I'll admit, I was beginning to freak out. "What's going on? What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He kept driving faster as sweat broke down the nape of his neck. Again, I tried to muster up the strength to grab my phone from under the seat. Then, a wave of exhaustion came over me. What was going on? Things began to get blurry, and I knew I needed to grab that phone. I tried to keep my eyes open and my body balanced. Where was he taking me? Why was I feeling so out of it? I didn't need to ponder his actions for too long, because I saw what he was speeding from. Red and blue flashing lights. It didn't take long before the car was swerving in all directions off the road, which I later found out was a result of a spike strip strategically placed on the road. All of this was a haze, and I passed out a few seconds after my body started to flail around the back seat. I, of course, had a dozen questions after the initial shock of everything wearing off. I'm still in shock from everything, and almost can't even believe what the authorities have told me. They told me that I had dodged a bullet. They told me that I must have had a guardian angel looking after me. The shocking part was that my Uber driver wasn't actually an Uber driver at all. Joe, poor Uber driver Joe, was murdered long before I was picked up. The guy had been driving me, which I later discovered his actual name was Trevor Kropp, had murdered Joe after being picked up. Joe had been dead for 18 hours, leaving Trevor a trail of 5 different girls to be picked up under the guise of Joe. All 5 girls were brutally murdered by the hands of Trevor. By the time he had picked me up, the authorities had caught on. They were able to trace the GPS attached to Joe's Uber app, which is how they were able to trap Trevor the way they did. I don't know what or who tipped the authorities off, but I'm so thankful that the game of cat and mouse ended with me safe and sound. I feel horrible for those girls that didn't make it, and how they were found is what made my stomach heave in disgust. All 5 girls had Ruffalin in their system. They found that there was a high quantity of the drug in a tequila bottle found in the car. Also, 6 bottles of water found in the back seat each had high levels of the drug. That's right, the water bottle that I drank from. That explains why I became so out of it. Again, I thought I was being responsible. Little did I know. Each girl had their ears, nose, and lips cut off. Based on blood analysis, the girls were alive during this. They were brutally sexually assaulted and left naked in a ditch to bleed out. It still haunts me to think about what would have become of my situation if the authorities hadn't found us. I'd be mutilated in a ditch right now. Like they said, I dodged a bullet, all in the name of responsibility. For now, I am just thanking my lucky stars that there were several good people that saved my life from one bad person. As far as Uber goes, I'm not saying they are to blame. They are a great service that you should still use. In fact, you'd probably get in more trouble driving drunk than having something like my story happen to you. Just be careful. Joe pulled all the different plays with me. He tried the party girl attempt, which didn't work. He outsmarted me. He took the friendly, nice guy approach. I drank his little concoction thinking it was just plain water. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I appreciate it a lot. And also, big thanks to my patrons, and if you want to support me, the link to my Patreon is in the description below. And if you want to hear more scary stories in the future, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Thank you.